The prestigious Galactic University's Xenobiology lecture hall buzzed with anticipation as students from across the cosmos settled into their seats. Among them sat Naira, a purple-scaled drachnid whose crystalline horns caught the light as she arranged her digital notepad. Her species was known for their logical approach to science, making her the perfect candidate for advanced xenobiological studies. Professor Jixel, a towering insectoid with compound eyes that reflected rainbow hues, clicked his mandibles for attention. Today's lecture focuses on one of the most fascinating aspects of our newest members of the Galactic Federation, humans and their unique reproductive biology. Naira's inner eyelids flickered with interest. Humans had only joined the Federation 3 solar cycles ago, yet they'd already made significant waves in the scientific community. Their rapid technological advancement from primitive rocket ships to quantum drives in mere centuries was unprecedented. Most sentient species, Professor Jixel continued, projecting a holographic diagram, evolved to have specific mating seasons tied to their planet's orbital patterns. This ensures offspring survive during optimal environmental conditions. He paused, mandibles twitching in what Naira recognized as amusement. Humans, however, have developed quite differently. The hologram shifted to display human reproductive anatomy. Several students chittered nervously, while others leaned forward in fascination. Naira found herself doing the latter, her scaled fingers flying across her notepad. Human males remain fertile continuously throughout their adult lives, with no seasonal variation. This constant reproductive capability is unique among advanced species. Professor Jixel's announcement caused a wave of murmurs through the lecture hall. Naira's horns vibrated with shock. "Impossible," she whispered, earning a glance from her seatmate, a gelatinous Morphean who rippled in agreement. Additionally, the professor continued, this continuous fertility is paired with persistent mating drive, theorized to be an evolutionary adaptation from their planet's highly competitive environment. A Centauri student raised their tentacle. "Professor, wouldn't such constant reproductive availability be evolutionarily wasteful?" "An excellent observation," Professor Jixel clicked approvingly. "However, this trait appears to have contributed to their species' remarkable adaptability and drive. The constant competition for mates has fostered innovation, creativity, and determination, traits that have served humanity well in their rapid advancement." Naira found herself glancing toward the human section of the lecture hall. A cluster of male humans sat there, seemingly unaware of how extraordinary their biology was. One of them caught her looking and smiled, causing her scales to flush a deeper purple. As the lecture continued, Naira's mind whirled with implications. Her own species mated once every 7 years, when their binary stars aligned. The idea of constant reproductive capability seemed almost primitive, yet humans had turned it into an evolutionary advantage. For next week's assignment, Professor Jixel announced as the lecture concluded, you will be paired with students from different species to compare reproductive strategies. This will culminate in a presentation on evolutionary advantages of various approaches. Naira gathered her materials, her crystalline horns humming with excitement at the prospect of studying human biology more closely. As she headed for the exit, she heard someone call out behind her. "Hey, purple scales." She turned to find the human male who had smiled at her earlier. He was tall for his species, with dark skin and curious brown eyes that seemed to sparkle with interest. "I'm Derek," he said, falling into step beside her. "Couldn't help but notice you taking about 1,000,000 notes during the lecture. You seemed pretty interested in human biology." Naira's scales shifted colors slightly, a sign of embarrassment in her species. "It's fascinating from a scientific perspective," she replied formally. "Your species' reproductive strategy is quite unique." Derek laughed, a sound that made her horns vibrate at an unusual frequency. "Well, if you're interested in learning more, maybe we could be partners for next week's assignment. I'd love to learn about drachnid biology too." Before Naira could formulate a properly logical response, she found herself nodding. "That would be academically beneficial," she managed. "Great. Derek's smile widened. I'll see you in the library tomorrow. We can start our research then. As she watched him walk away, Naira realized she had just agreed to spend significant time studying human reproduction with an attractive male specimen. Her logical drachnid mind told her this was purely academic, but something else, something decidedly unscientific, made her horns hum with anticipation. Little did she know, this partnership would lead to discoveries far beyond the scope of their xenobiology assignment, challenging everything she thought she knew about humans, emotion, and herself. The university library's xenobiology section hummed with the quiet sounds of students studying. Naira sat at a private research station, her crystalline horns glowing softly in the dim light as she reviewed her notes from the previous lecture. Her scales rippled with nervous energy as she waited for Derek to arrive. "Sorry I'm late." Derek's whispered voice made her horns vibrate. He slid into the seat beside her, carrying a steaming cup of what humans called coffee. "Had to grab some fuel for the study session." Naira's olfactory sensors picked up the bitter aroma. "Your species' dependence on stimulants is another fascinating adaptation," she observed, trying to maintain scientific detachment despite her awareness of his proximity. Derek grinned. "Speaking of fascinating adaptations, your horns are glowing." "Do they always do that?" "They respond to electrical impulses in my brain," Naira explained, willing them to dim. "It's a form of secondary communication among my species." She purposely didn't mention that their current pattern indicated attraction and interest. "That's incredible." Derek leaned closer, studying the crystalline structures. "So they're like mood rings, but actually scientific?" Naira tilted her head. "I don't understand that reference." "Never mind," Derek chuckled, pulling out his data pad. "Let's focus on our assignment. I've been reading about drachnid reproduction. The binary star alignment thing is pretty intense. Only being able to mate every 7 years must require serious planning." "It's logical and efficient," Naira replied, her scales shifting to a deeper purple. "Unlike human males' constant state of reproductive readiness, which seems chaotic?" Derek suggested, his brown eyes twinkling with amusement. "I was going to say energetically demanding," Naira corrected, finding herself drawn into those eyes. "How does your species manage to accomplish anything with such persistent mating drives?" Derek's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, that's actually a really interesting question. I think it's part of what drives us. All that energy has to go somewhere, so we channel it into other things: art, science, exploration. Like your species' rapid technological advancement." "Exactly." Derek's enthusiasm was contagious, making Naira's horns glow brighter. "We're always pushing boundaries, looking for the next challenge. Whether it's pursuing a potential mate or solving scientific problems, humans don't like taking no for an answer." As they worked, Naira found herself increasingly fascinated by both the subject matter and her study partner. Derek's perspectives challenged her logical worldview, introducing elements of chaos theory into her understanding of evolution. "What I don't understand," she said several hours later, "is how human females cope with males' constant reproductive availability. Doesn't it create social instability?" Derek ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Naira had noticed he made when considering complex questions. "We've developed social structures and cultural norms to manage it. Plus, it's not just about reproduction. For humans, physical intimacy is also about emotional connection." "Emotional connection?" Naira's horns pulsed with curiosity. "But reproduction is a biological imperative, not an emotional one." "For humans, it's both," Derek explained gently. "We feel things intensely: love, desire, attachment. These emotions guide our choices in mates far more than pure biological drives." Naira processed this information, her scientific mind struggling with its implications. "That seems inefficient." "Maybe," Derek smiled, "but it's also beautiful. Haven't you ever felt something that transcended logical explanation?" As their eyes met, Naira's horns blazed with sudden brightness, and her scales shifted through several shades of purple. To her horror, she realized she was experiencing exactly what Derek described, an emotional response that defied scientific analysis. "I should process this data," she said quickly, gathering her materials. "For the assignment." Derek's hand brushed her arm as she stood, sending an electrical surge through her horns. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice soft. Naira nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she hurried from the library, her mind raced with new questions. How could she maintain scientific objectivity while experiencing such illogical reactions? More importantly, why didn't she want to? In her dormitory that night, Naira reviewed her notes, but found herself repeatedly distracted by memories of Derek's smile, his laugh, the way his eyes lit up when discussing human nature. Her horns hadn't stopped humming since their study session, and her scales kept shifting colors without her conscious control. "This is highly irregular," she muttered to herself, but even as she said it, she realized she was looking forward to tomorrow's research session with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with xenobiology. The logical part of her mind warned that she was venturing into dangerous territory. The growing attraction she felt toward Derek challenged everything she believed about controlled, efficient reproduction. Yet another part of her, one she hadn't known existed until now, whispered that perhaps there was something to learn from the human way of following one's heart alongside one's head. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her last thought was that tomorrow's study session would definitely require more extensive research, purely for academic purposes, of course. 3 weeks into their research partnership, Naira found herself in an unprecedented situation. Her normally ordered mind was in chaos, her horns constantly humming at frequencies that her roommate had begun to notice. Every study session with Derek seemed to make it worse, or perhaps better, she wasn't sure anymore. Today, they had moved their research to the university's botanical gardens, surrounded by specimens from thousands of worlds. Derek sat cross-legged on a bench, bathed in the light of the artificial sun, while Naira tried not to notice how the golden rays highlighted his features. "So," Derek said, reviewing their notes, "we've covered reproductive biology, mating patterns, and evolutionary advantages. But I think we're missing something important for the presentation." "What could we be missing?" Naira asked, her scales shifting nervously. "We've analyzed every aspect of both species' reproductive strategies." Derek set down his datapad. "We haven't talked about courtship rituals." Naira's horns flashed brightly before she could control them. "Courtship? But that's not strictly necessary for reproduction." "Maybe not for drachnids," Derek smiled, "but for humans, it's essential. We don't just mate when the stars align, we choose our partners based on attraction, compatibility, shared interests." "That seems..." Naira searched for the right word, "complicated." "It is," Derek admitted, shifting closer. "But that's what makes it special. Take us, for example." Naira's scales rippled with color. "Us?" "Yeah," Derek's voice softened. "Haven't you noticed how well we work together? How our different perspectives help us understand things better? How sometimes, when we're talking, your horns glow in patterns I've never seen before?" "You've been studying my horn patterns?" Naira asked, simultaneously thrilled and mortified. "I've been studying everything about you," Derek confessed. "The way your scales change color when you're excited about a new discovery. How your inner eyelids flutter when you're processing new information. The sound of your laugh when I make a terrible science joke." Naira's logical mind scrambled for a response, but for once, logic seemed inadequate. "That's very thorough research," she managed. Derek laughed softly. "I'm trying to tell you something, Naira. Something that has nothing to do with our xenobiology assignment." Before she could respond, a group of students rounded the corner. Among them was Professor Jixel, who clicked his mandibles in greeting. "Ah, excellent. Our star research partners," the professor chittered. "How is the presentation coming along?" We've made significant progress, Naira said quickly, grateful for the interruption. Our comparative analysis of reproductive strategies is nearly complete. Wonderful. I look forward to seeing how you integrate the emotional aspects of human reproduction with the logical efficiency of drachnid mating patterns. The professor's compound eyes gleamed. It's a fascinating contrast, don't you think? As the professor moved on with his group, Naira felt Derek's eyes on her. The moment had shifted, but the tension remained, humming like the crystals in her horns. Maybe we should call it a day, Derek suggested gently. Give ourselves time to process the data. Naira nodded, gathering her materials with trembling hands. As she stood to leave, Derek caught her hand, his warm fingers intertwining with her scaled ones. Naira, he said softly, I know this is complicated. I know it challenges everything you believe about logical reproduction and efficient mating strategies. But some of the best discoveries in science happened because someone dared to challenge established theories. Her horns blazed with emotion as she met his gaze. What are you suggesting? Have dinner with me tonight, he said. Not as research partners. Not for the assignment. Just because I want to spend time with you, learning everything about you that isn't in any xenobiology textbook. Naira knew she should decline. Should remind him of the logical impossibility of what he was suggesting. Should point out all the biological, social, and practical barriers to human drachnid relationships. Instead, she heard herself say, the university cafeteria serves evening meal in 2 hours. Derek's smile made her scales shimmer in colors she didn't know they could produce. I know a better place. A little restaurant in the cultural district that specializes in both earth and drachnid cuisine. What do you say? As Naira looked at their still joined hands, she realized she was about to conduct the most illogical experiment of her academic career. I say, this will require extensive documentation. Derek's laugh echoed through the botanical garden, and Naira found herself joining in, her horns glowing with a joy that defied scientific explanation. Sometimes, she was beginning to learn, the most important discoveries happened when you let go of trying to explain everything. The news spread through the Galactic University faster than a quantum transmission. A drachnid and a human, dating. It defied every social norm, every logical expectation. Naira felt the stares as she walked through the corridors, her horns dimmed in an attempt to attract less attention. Did you see the way her scales changed color when he touched her hand? I heard human males can't control their mating urges. What would their offspring even look like? It's against the natural order. The whispers followed her everywhere, but none of them heard as much as the message she'd received from the Drachnid Science Council that morning. They strongly advised her to reconsider her inappropriate social experiment with the human male. Derek found her in their usual spot in the botanical gardens, her horns barely glowing. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her. Rough day. The council contacted me, she replied, her voice flat. They believe our relationship will compromise the objectivity of our research. Derek's jaw tightened. And what do you believe? Naira's scales shifted through various shades of purple as she struggled with her answer. I believe that for the first time in my life, I understand why humans let emotions guide their actions. And it terrifies me. Because it's not logical. Because it's more powerful than logic, she whispered. When I'm with you, my horns glow with frequencies I've never experienced before. My scales change colors I didn't know they could produce. I find myself thinking about you during lectures, during meals, during my designated rest period. Derek reached for her hand, and despite her troubled thoughts, her scales immediately brightened at his touch. You know, humans have a saying, the heart wants what it wants. Humans have an organ dedicated to emotional decision-making. Naira asked, momentarily distracted by this new scientific information. Derek laughed, the sound making her horns hum. It's a metaphor. It means that sometimes, feelings don't follow rules or logic. They just are. Before Naira could respond, a group of human students passed by, pointing and whispering. One of them called out, "Hey Harrison, trying to study drachnid anatomy up close?" Derek stood up so quickly that Naira's horns flashed in alarm. "Want to say that again?" he challenged, his voice low and dangerous. "Derek, don't," Naira pleaded, her scales darkening with distress. "They're not worth the emotional energy expenditure." He sat back down, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. "I hate that they're making this harder than it needs to be," he muttered. "You know I'm not just with you for research purposes, right?" Naira's horns pulsed softly. "I know. Your elevated heart rate and dilated pupils whenever you see me are clear physiological indicators of genuine attraction. Only you could make scientific observation sound romantic." Derek smiled, then grew serious. "But we need to talk about what we're going to do. The xenobiology presentation is next week, and after that. After that, the logical course of action would be to terminate our social experiment," Naira said, her horns dimming. "Return to our respective species' normal mating patterns. Is that what you want?" "Want is irrelevant." The council dash. "No," Derek interrupted, turning to face her fully. "For once, forget about the council, forget about logic, forget about what's expected. What do you want, Naira?" Her horns blazed suddenly, lighting up the garden around them. "I want to understand why human males evolved to be so frustratingly persistent," she said, but her scales shifted to colors of affection. "I want to continue our research, both academic and personal. I want." She trailed off as Derek leaned closer, his breath warm against her scales. "What else do you want?" Instead of answering, Naira did something completely illogical. She kissed him. Her scales lit up like a supernova, her horns humming at frequencies that probably disrupted half the electronic devices in the garden, but she didn't care. When they finally broke apart, Derek looked dazed. "Wow," he breathed. "I didn't know drachnids could kiss." "We can't, usually," Naira admitted. "I've been studying human mating behaviors. For research purposes, of course." Derek laughed and pulled her closer. "Of course. Any other human behaviors you'd like to research?" Before she could answer, her communicator chimed with another message from the council. But for the first time in her life, Naira chose not to respond immediately to authority. Instead, she turned off the device and let herself be drawn into another kiss. Let them talk. Let them stare. Some things, she was learning, were worth defying logic for. The day of the xenobiology presentation arrived with all the gravity of a solar eclipse. The lecture hall was packed not just with students, but with faculty members and even representatives from various species scientific councils. Naira's horns hummed with nervous energy as she and Derek prepared their presentation materials. "Ready to change some minds?" Derek whispered, giving her scaled hand a quick squeeze. "That would be a highly optimistic outcome," Naira replied, but her scales shifted to warm, confident colors. Professor Jixel called them forward. "Our next presentation examines the comparative reproductive strategies of humans and drachnids, with particular focus on evolutionary advantages." Though I must note, his mandibles clicked with amusement, our presenters have engaged in some, hands-on research. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. Naira's scales darkened slightly, but Derek stepped forward confidently. "Thank you, Professor," he began. "When we started this research, we expected to find that our species' different reproductive strategies were incompatible. Humans, with our constant fertility and emotional connections, seemed chaotic compared to the logical, astronomically timed drachnid approach." Naira activated their holographic display, showing comparative data. "However, our research revealed something unexpected. Both approaches evolved to ensure not just reproduction, but successful adaptation to environmental challenges. Drachnid reproduction," Derek continued, evolved to maximize resources and ensure genetic diversity through carefully timed matching. Human reproduction evolved to encourage constant innovation and emotional bonding, driving our species to create stable social groups and advance technologically. But the most fascinating discovery, Naira said, her horns glowing brightly, was that these seemingly opposed strategies share a common goal: the continuation and improvement of their species. Their presentation continued, backed by meticulous research and data. But it was during the conclusion that they decided to take a risk. Our research, Naira announced, her scales shimmering with determination, has implications beyond reproductive biology. It suggests that different evolutionary strategies can not only coexist but complement each other. Just as the Galactic Federation benefits from the diversity of its member species, we believe that embracing our differences, biological, cultural, and emotional, makes us stronger. The lecture hall fell silent. Then, from the back, a member of the Drachnid Science Council stood. "You propose that cross-species relationships could benefit our societies? Based on what evidence?" Derek stepped forward. "Based on us. Working together, we've combined human intuition with Drachnid logic to create research that neither of us could have accomplished alone. Our relationship has challenged assumptions, sparked new ideas, and proved that differences can be strengths." "But it's not natural," another council member protested. "Natural?" Naira's horns blazed suddenly. "Was it natural when we first left our home planets? When we developed faster-than-light travel? When we formed the Galactic Federation? Progress has never been about following natural order, it's about imagining new possibilities." Her scales were shifting through colors of passion and conviction as she continued. "I used to believe that logic was everything. But through this research, and yes, through my relationship with Derek, I've learned that emotion and logic aren't opposites. They're complementary forces, like the binary stars that guide my species' reproduction." Professor Jixel's compound eyes gleamed. "An excellent observation. And your conclusions?" Derek and Naira looked at each other, then back at their audience. "Our conclusion," they said together, "is that the future belongs to those willing to embrace new possibilities." The silence that followed was broken by Professor Jixel's appreciative mandible clicks. "Outstanding work. You've not only presented thorough research but demonstrated its practical applications. Full marks." As applause filled the hall, led enthusiastically by their fellow students, Naira felt Derek's hand find hers. Her horns hummed at a frequency that perfectly matched his heartbeat. Later, as they walked through the botanical gardens where their relationship had first bloomed, Derek asked, "So, what's next for us?" Naira's scales shifted through thoughtful colors. "Well, there are numerous other aspects of human-drachnid interaction that require research. For thoroughness, we should probably conduct long-term studies." "Long-term?" Derek grinned. "How long are we talking?" "Preliminary results suggest." She stepped closer, her horns glowing softly. "A lifetime of research might be necessary." "I love it when you talk scientific," Derek laughed, pulling her into a kiss. Above them, through the garden's transparent dome, the stars twinkled, a cosmic reminder that in a universe vast enough to contain billions of galaxies, there was plenty of room for love that defied logic, crossed species barriers, and opened new frontiers of possibility.